Hello there. Welcome to my first BAKERview seminar for 2021, where we are going to dive straight into clean label technologies. Why? Well, because it's important going into 2021 that this should be one of the things that is at the top of your list. You know, as a baker, as a food developer, I have to admit, 2020 has been pretty quiet on the ingredient innovation side of things, but that should not stop you from developing and creating new products, right? All right, according to Nielsen, the share of clean label sales has increased in the last couple of years, making up to 33% of total food and beverage sales last year. This is a mainstream movement with the millennials driving the trend at 33%, though it's bigger than just them. At least 93% of US households have purchased a clean label product at the grocery store. And half of all shopping trips now include the purchase of a clean label product. Currently, there are no FDA guidelines or definition for what clean means. However, it's generally recognized to have the following. I'm not going to read it out. It's there for you to go check it out, whether or not you agree with me, but that's what's coming back to us from the field on what is perceived as clean. While the public might want simple, natural labels, they are still expecting what products should look and taste like originally. So your clean cake needs to look vibrant and taste aromatic while having the shelf life that your customer expects from you. So as you can see, it's hard. It's difficult to go clean on things, especially like flavors and colors. And one of the questions that I start asking myself is, if we go clean, why did we start dirty in the first place, right? One of the biggest reasons why we bake with chemically sounding names in the first place is that these chemicals allow us to bake consistent, safe, quality products with less skilled talent. They also allow us to create products that can withstand the pressures of high-speed manufacturing with a longer shelf life. So why is this important? Why is high speed important to get longer shelf life? Or why longer shelf life, right? Well, because in the grand scheme of things, the higher the throughput, the lesser labor will have an impact. Labor is the most expensive thing that's on the line. And the higher the throughput, the more cost effective the products will be. And if we make this product last longer in the shelf life, we can go further with the product, a further distance, and logistics will be more effective. So just remember this point because I'm going to come back to it later. But the reason why we do what we do is to cater to our processes and to make sure that we produce food-safe products. Just so you know, natural and clean labels negatively affects this, okay? And there may be a need to increase the cost of your formulation so that you can recoup some of the increasing expenses. And all that aside, baking clean label is not impossible. In fact, there are plenty of resourceful substitutes that fill in just fine. Today, I will cover these 13 tips in my presentation. colors, flavors, emulsifiers, dough conditioners, enzymes, leavening agents, heat-treated flour, trans fat-free fat, anti-mold preservatives, antioxidant preservatives, starches, fibers, hydrocolloids, and equipment. I know not too many people talk about equipment, but equipment's important also in cleaning up. All right, don't forget. All right, let's talk about colors. Natural colors like annatto and turmeric for yellow and orange, that's a no-brainer, right? Beetroot juice for red and algae for green can actually replace artificial colors. But have you used natural colors before? If so, you sometimes have to use more, just to get the same effect. This does two things. It dilutes your system, so your emulsion or your frosting viscosity can be affected. You may get a bitter or chemical taste depending on which vendor you choose from. All right, so make sure you get the gel versions of natural colors to stay away from these problems. Actually, our sponsors, IFC, have concentrated natural solutions that will work for you and solve these two problems that I mentioned. Here, let me show you their red color. All right, I have two colors here that I would like to share with you. Okay, so here is the red. You can see it doesn't really look red. It looks a little reddish, yellowish, and it's because it's natural. It's a natural color. It's from beets, right? So you can see it stains really red. And if you put this on your frosting, it's pretty concentrated, So, and it smells great too, by the way. Who knew? Color could smell so good, right? This is from IFC Solutions. So Joanna, could you please put their information onto the chat box? All right, we want to look at green. Green is really hard to do. Of course, blue and yellow mixed green. But this is actually from a natural source. I believe it was somewhat plant-based. It's a little darker. So it's kind of like a Christmas tree kind of green, if you can see. Okay. So these are colors that I wanted to point out from IFC. Reach out to them, all natural and very, very concentrated. Sometimes it won't wash off my hands. So that's how concentrated it is. All right. So let's go on. Let's continue on flavors. All right. Next up, natural flavors. Natural flavors are actually coming strong across the baking industry. People are getting away from artificial butter flavors, and they use different products like yeast-based extract and even malts. Okay, now how do you replace artificial butter? It's really difficult to replace the butter flavor. I would say go with a butter concentrate flavor. I think Butter Buds would have some of that. Carry Ingredients would have some of that as well. Yeast-based extract, you can reach out to people like Parados and Lasaf. They would have those kind of yeast-based extract that could possibly replace cheese flavors, dairy flavors. Okay, and then like I said, malt would be a good replacer. It will give a different dimension to that butter kind of flavor. Okay, you can get amazing malt flavors like these. What you can obtain from Erex when you approach them and say that BAKERpedia showed this to you. They will send you an array of malt flavors so that you can use this to reformulate for your dairy or long ferments or sour ferments. Okay, these are all natural malt flavors that you can use in your formulation. How cool is that? All right. Just wanted to show you some more. This is an organic Bali malt. Hi, Mark. This is an organic barley malt, and it is one of the most amazing flavors that I have ever used in my formulations. So you can get a sample of this from them. Just reach out to them with the email below. Okay. Oh, I do have one more thing I want to show you. And I believe that's a new technology that came up a couple of years ago. It's from Zoom Essence, and they have dairy flavors as well. These are dairy based, so they are allergens. But if you're looking for a concentrated flavor to replace your artificial butter flavor, then you can use this. And because they use a really unique technique of zooming their flavors, they zoom it on a plate and it dries out, so it is very, very concentrated. And Mark also have used this, so we basically use very little in all the formulations that we formulate with. Okay, so reach out to Zoom. Their information should be in the chat box. So emulsifiers. What are emulsifiers? They are tiny little molecules that stabilize bubbles in foam, batter, dough, and even frosting. What does that mean? Simply that the bubbles you put into the system stays small little bubbles and don't coalesce into bigger bubbles. Every time they coalesce, it means that there is instability in the system. So let's talk about frosting first. The most delicate emulsion in the bakery system are frostings, okay? Frostings are air in a liquid interface, so they are very fragile and they must remain stable at all times during the process, storage, and delivery, if you know what I mean, okay? If you are making the frosting at the bakery and you're freezing it, and then it's being thawed out at the grocery bakery and put onto display at the bakery aisle there, this particular emulsion has to be stable. Otherwise, you will lose the definition of the frosting and it might even melt, okay? So, while mono and diglycerides and PGMEs are our go-to emulsifiers to stabilize this system, there is really no alternative that would be as process friendly. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of us still have to depend on these. However, if you're not concerned with the process and you have the flexibility to go on to a different process, then alpha cyclodextrins would be the way to go. They need a different way of processing, but they can be used in place of mono and diglycerides and PGMEs. Okay. Joanna, could you please put Wacker's information on here for getting a sample of alpha cyclodextrins? All right. Contact our friends at Wacker Corp to learn how to replace this and use this particular ingredient to replace eggs as well. Maybe 20-30% of the eggs in your formulation, that's going to help the cost. So in cake and frozen batters, we have seen lecithin and enzymes being used, but still nothing quite as robust as PGMEs. You can use canola, soy, sunflower lecithin, and actually wheat protein isolates too have been known to replace emulsifiers. This is usually also done with an enzyme blend. You can get sunflower lecithin from Saranda, and their contact is here, and wheat protein isolates from NGP. Okay, so let's talk next about dough conditioners. What are dough conditioners? Dough conditioners are anything you add to the dough to help you process the dough properly. Okay, so for large doughs like 1,000 pounds, it takes about 8 to 12 minutes to process. I would like to keep everything less than 10 minutes preferably, but I know sometimes that's not possible the way some of you run your facilities. It's the dough after mixing actually sit in a trough for 8 to 12 minutes. Now, natural dough can't handle conditions like that. So that's why you would need dough conditioners, okay? This is why datum and SSL is used in the first place. You know, it's datum and SSL is used mainly because of their protein interaction. That's why many bakers often call these emulsifiers dough strengtheners. It strengthens them while they sit there ready to be highly stressed through the dough depositors, okay? If anything to do with industrial baking is the dough depositors, that's extrusion, and how the dough is being put to measure at the exact weights. That's the particular stress point that dough conditioners can happen, can work their magic. Okay, so if we're going to replace this dough conditioners, we have to understand the stress point that it's going through, and we have to do whatever we can to reduce the stresses even within the dough or the depositor to clean up the label. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. I've seen many bakers just take out datum and SSL and put in more vital wheat gluten, but that can be done. It's expensive, but also think about using enzymes like glucose oxidase, transglutamase, xylanase, phospholipase. All these would help with a blend. All right. I would also like to recommend you to look into Bartek's new conditioning blend involving fumaric acid that helps softens up the dough, reduce your mixing time, and make it easier to process. Bartek's information is going to be in the chat box, so you can reach out to them and ask them for a sample with dough conditioning. Okay. There are process replacements as well, like I said, and these come from aging your flour up to 2 weeks. And of course, longer fermentation time helps for your sponges. Even increasing it from 4 to 8 hours would help condition your dough and help you run at a higher speed. Of course, we don't all have this luxury of increasing our fermentation time. And I know that myself. I've been in these facilities. I've seen how tight your spaces are. There's no way you can accommodate more vats, even any kind of fermentation. So this particular advice is for people who are building out plants. Okay, if you're gonna build out plant, don't build out something that's straight dough. If you want a cleaner label, build out something that has 4 to 8, possibly 8 hours of fermentation. So in the long run, it's gonna save you money. It's gonna save you money in the cost of a couple $millions a year, especially with dough conditioners. Okay, so that's my tip for you. But that's for the long run. Short run, most facilities need to have dough conditioners, and most of us need to look for solution to replace datum and SSL. Okay, let's move on to enzymes. Okay, enzymes act as natural alternative for many ingredients and functions. A few ways that can help formulas is by improving flour quality and emulsification and increase water absorption and machinability of the dough. Enzyme and ascorbic acid blends all have been used to replace oxidizers like potassium bromate and ADA. Leavening acids or leavening agents. the aluminum in SALP is like a magical ingredient. It is very hard to replace. Many people have tried to do that. Well, aluminum and phosphates are being replaced right now as we speak by fast-acting baking powder systems that are not based on the traditional acid-based chemistry. All right. Instead, this UK-based company called Kudos Blends has developed a heat-activated leavening system that is extremely process tolerant and not susceptible to react prematurely during the pre-baking process, therefore making all the gas available during the baking process. I've seen the results and it's impressive. So what is the ingredient? It's sodium bicarbonate with a chloride. That's all I know. Okay, next up, let's talk about heat-treated flour. We have been telling people to use this. What is this magical ingredient? Okay, flour is heated to about 210 to 230 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 minutes. This is enough to gelatinize the starch within the flour with the remaining water, and also does some denaturation and deconfiguration of the proteins, making them almost react like emulsifiers. Okay, it can be used to substitute chlorinated flour. And Solange's Mills has this technology to help you do that as well. And if you are not from the US, you're like probably scratching your head. What is chlorinated flour? Because it's not used anywhere else in the world but the US. Okay. The US love high ratio cakes. High ratio cakes meaning cakes that have higher sugar to flour ratio, somewhere between 150% of the flour weight. So this is a lot of sugar to carry within the flour system, right? You need a chlorinated flour to help carry all this sugar. What it is really is the cake flour treated with chlorine has modified starches that can swell and form a nice viscous system to help carry the sugar. All right. High ratio cakes made with chlorinated flour are less likely to collapse. So if you're trying to bake a cake right now and you see some form of collapse or some form of dense structure in the center of the cake, it's going to be remedied by chlorinated flour. Okay, so you can also now replace chlorinated flour with heat treated flour and pre-gelatinized starch. Although it may be a little more expensive, but there is a price to pay if you want to replace chlorinated flour. I really do believe that the market has now found a place for heat-treated cake flour to replace chlorinated flour. Okay, so next I would like to talk about fats and trans fat-free alternatives has been in place since the regulation in 2018. Palm alternatives are basically what people use right now. And we are seeing more and more acceptance of algae oils and therefore algae butter. And I wouldn't be surprised if algae butter is going to be the next big thing you'll see on labels. Don't forget, there's lots of chatter on lard as well. Yes, lard is coming back, but don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing, okay? And apparently lard is clean label. Okay, you know, that's fine. That's not healthy, but it's clean label. Please don't Q&A argue with me because I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. All right, let's go on to anti-mold. This is important because it's a huge issue with everybody, you know. Every bakery, I don't care who you are, how small you are, how big you are, mold is a huge issue, and it's a big contributor to our waste levels. You know, remember the best thing you can do is sanitation and water activity. Without these key elements, your anti-mold fight is just half-baked. Yes, I use a bakery pun. Go to our water activity page on BAKERpedia to learn more about water activity. It's important that you learn about this intrinsic basic factor about what contributes to mold, water activity. So how do you decrease water activity? In my YouTube series, Ask Dr. Lin, around episodes 27, 28, I'll go into depth a little bit more. But humectants like sugar, honey, and other salt and gums, and other water binders that you can find that are polar in its molecular structure, they all decrease water activity, making water less available for mold growth. So go study your water activity, honestly, before you increase any kind of antimicrobials in your system, okay? If you are looking for clean label alternatives that are naturally obtained sorbic acids that does take the place of potassium sorbate. Take, for example, sorbate from J&K Ingredients. I'm gonna have Joanna put their information on here. In yeasted foods, let's give sorbate some time. Sorbate is a natural extract from the rowan berries, and it's created into a easy to use form for you from J&K Ingredients, so that you can dose it directly into your formulas for cakes. Okay, so sorbate for cakes. In yeasted foods, you can use sorbic acid in the encapsulated form to extend its shelf life. I've seen this done in tortillas. You can get encapsulated sorbic acid from Balchem, and Joanna would have Balchem's information below as well. In addition, the other alternatives for bread are things like fumaric acid, cultured wheat, and whey with vinegar. Fumaric acid can be obtained from Bartek, and cultured wheat also can be obtained from J&K in their bread meat line. Don't forget, we can also rely on prune and raisin concentrates as anti-molding ingredients. Not only do they provide a flavor, they also provide some sweetness to your product as well. I know I used a lot of it in my product development formulation in my previous life. The only downside to using these natural mold inhibitors is the color and the flavor. But other than that, it works really, really well. All right. They can, lastly, if aroma is not a problem, rosemary or oregano extract, cinnamon or clove are more natural ingredients for anti-mold. As with any baker out there, we have all baked with cinnamon bread. We've always wondered, why does a cinnamon bread not mold? And this is the reason why, because cinnamon is a natural anti-mold ingredient. Okay, so again, you can get fumaric from Bartek and cultured wheat from J&K Ingredients if you need. All right, one more thing that really came up on my radar last year, and it's really interesting because this is not an ingredient solution, it's a packaging solution. This company, new startup called So Fresh, has come up with a special antimicrobial packaging. And you can actually remove Calpro from your label and still get 2 weeks of shelf life. All right. So, as you can see, just put in your bag, your bread in this bag. It's actually double lined. Okay. And you can obtain a sample and do your testing, and you will see some miracle happen without Calpro for 2 weeks. Okay. Okay, next, let's talk about antioxidants and chelating agents. What are those things? You must be asking me, why do they sound so chemical sounding? Why are they chemical sounding? I don't know. I just think that Chelating agents are things that food scientists use in terms of terminology to grab at radicals, grab at oxidants. Okay, so TBHQ has been used frequently in icings and frostings, and it's been under attack because consumers just don't recognize it. Still, it's one of the best ways in preventing rancidity in oil-based products, like what you do in icings and frostings, especially if you put it through a freeze-thaw cycle. Okay. I have seen a rosemary extract from Chemin products that has been used to replace TBHQ in this particular function. And it's used at a higher ppm with no negative organoleptic attributes. So this is interesting. So and this is obviously developing in this field. I hope to see more solutions.
Yeah, and it does not taste like rosemary or change color or anything like that.
Great. Well, I'll be like surprised if something tastes red and tastes like rosemary. A lot of questions about that. Okay, so let's move on to hydrocolloids. Hydrocolloids or gums have been known to improve viscosity and gives you better functionality in batters to handle specific gravity issues, especially if you put your product through an Oaks machine. Okay, gums and hydrocolloids do provide that additional stability that you need if you want to replace emulsifiers. You can use anything from xanthan gum to guar gum, and this really helps clean up your label if you are determined to replace PGMEs. Okay, starches, mechanically pre-gelatinized starch, which is a mechanical modification of starch to make it functional. It is used to replace chemically modified starch and dextrins. Okay, everything from high amylopectin or amylose corn to tapioca starch. So reach out to companies like MGP Ingredients or Ingredion to try this pre-gel starch. The various modifications will provide viscosity and therefore increase the stability of your networks. You need this, especially when you are really zeroing in on emulsification replacement. Okay, let's talk about this not talked about item for clean labels. All right, I want to point out that this is a solution because fibers some of them have a polar and non-polar end. And as you know, a non-polar and polar end makes this molecule an emulsifier. Okay, so don't overlook fibers, any kind of fibers. Okay, particularly soluble fibers. Aquafaba has been used in most homes for egg replacement. It is currently not commercially available. We had Luca on a podcast with Mark and I. The last update he gave us was he is looking for a commercial ingredient supplier to produce this on a mass scale. So if you're an ingredient solution provider and you want to get connected to Luca, please reach out to us and we will make the connection for you because we really believe in this ingredient and we want to see this come to market. Okay, Aquafaba. Hopefully we get to see it in 2021, 2022. Another recent development is from the maple fiber, and it has been studied and shows promising results in replacing mono and diglycerides. Originally, they launched with, I got it here too. This is the original maple fiber, okay? It works really, really well. I've used it to replace emulsifiers. However, the feedback to the Neurovant team was that you can only use it in darker systems, right? Because of the natural color in here, all right? It's from maple trees, okay? So they came up with a blanc. Look at how amazing that is. That's going to work well in any systems that you formulate for in terms of replacing emulsifiers. So reach out to Novaron. Their email and contact is below, and you should be able to try it out for yourself. Okay. All right. Okay, as you can see, this particular maple fiber uses an interesting method. It goes under high water pressure and high temperature for extraction. It doesn't go through the typical chemical extraction for the fiber. Okay, so no chemicals used to extract these maple fiber. All right, it could be your next saving grace in cleaning up your label. All right. So I would like to come to the next part of my presentation, which is equipment. Okay. So while we have talked about ingredient solutions, they are really for the short term. All right. For the long run, if you're going to build out, if you're going to upgrade new equipment, if you're going to put in a new plant, you know, your solution is really to look at your methodology and your equipment. For example, by using sponge and dough systems or including a brew process, you naturally hydrate your dough to make it easier to machine. Okay, anytime you can give it even 30 minutes, it's going to machine better. Okay, don't forget, by using stress-free dough systems that are available from people like Macatherm or even Fridge, you know, yes, they may be lower in speeds, but they are effective in eliminating many dough conditioners on your label. All right. Also, don't forget your softeners, your CalPro can be reduced by effective thermal profiling of your system. If you thermal profile your system and you target longer bakeouts, that earlier arrivals on the S-curve will help you dry the bread out and bake off more moisture. Okay, so ECD has the Malt product, so please contact them below and tell them I need to understand the thermal profile a little bit more. Okay, and get a mole to analyze your thermal profile. And lastly, look for an easy to sanitize cooling system. All right, together with a really efficient air filtration system. These two go together to reduce your dependence on mold inhibitor. One more thing, I like to emphasize on sanitizing your cooling belts. Okay, if you have a chance to sanitize your belts 1 to 2 times a week, it would drastically help reduce mold contamination on your product. I know some of you are looking at me, you're like saying, she's crazy, I don't have time to do this. You know, we don't have that much breaks, you know, to stop the cooling tower and do the sanitation, you know. But just remember, you are going to have production shutdowns for changeovers, for cleanup, for sanitation. So take that time to sanitize your belts. All right. In the end, it's all about what role ingredients have in your formula and truly knowing what they play. Okay. Pay attention to all aspects of your formulas and process, and determine if you need to decrease your fermentation time, temperature, and adjustments to your water and mixing times as well. Okay, so back to where I asked you, do you remember what I said about making your product go further? Okay, I said this earlier on in the presentation. In order for your products to be baked at a high efficiency, your product has to go further. Means that they can't just stay in your town. They have to go to multiple towns for high efficiencies to work, okay? It doesn't make sense for your high output plants to have a shelf life of less than a week. It just doesn't. it's not going to help your bottom line. So in order for your products to go more than 1 week and to go to the next 2 states over, it has to not mold early. And it still has to taste good as the day it was baked. All right. While this is a challenge for a lot of food developers to juggle, I hope today has helped you in some of the thinking and some of those solution in terms of clean label. So it remains clear to me that the clean label trend will be here to stay for the next few years. In about 3 years, we're no longer going to see datum and SSL on the label. I'm just a messenger. Don't shoot me, but that's what I see. At BAKERpedia, we will be focusing on finding innovative solutions for you, experimenting and asking Mark to bake everything off. Okay. So we are now reaching out to companies that are not sponsors. If you want your product to be showcased in our technology session, please reach out to Lily or Cindy at sales@bakerpedia.com. Okay. And for those of you who are sponsors, thank you so much for educating me and training me on what new technologies are out there. All right. Yeah. What do you think? And Brandon's going to start questions.
As I've been thinking about this, as I've been watching the seminar and leading up to it, as I've been thinking about it, one of the things that comes to my mind with the clean label trend is that to some extent I see this evolving in the future. Like while the FDA will not create any acknowledgement of clean label and a regulation, but there may be other things that will happen. In Europe, they've long had numbers. Because in the end, what it's about is that the consumer wants to understand what it is they are eating. Clean label started with generally just pantry recognizable ingredients, and that list has in some areas expanded and in other areas shrunk for various different reasons and perspectives. And even if it is using something like datums, what is it? How is it made? Where does it come from? And I think that's what the consumer really wants to know. And that's going to be part of driving all of this clean label stuff and understanding, where it comes from and how it's being used. What is it really something that is highly processed? Is it creating a highly processed situation as a processing aid? Or is it just something that is functional in improving the quality of the product and the shelf life from a eating quality perspective, not from an antimicrobial perspective? Because we often hear questions about, oh, I want a clean label product and I want to increase my shelf life. Well, what about shelf life are you trying to increase? If it's simply microbial, that's one issue. If it's mouthfeel, it's a different issue. If it's flavor, it's another issue altogether. So there's different things that mean shelf life in that sense. So yeah, it is a very interesting challenge, and it is something that started small and it's really been mainstream for a while now.
Okay. And that is so true. If given an option, Mark, I would always like the molding problem because it's so much easier to solve.
I hear you. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because it's just, cleaning up and packaging and adding, a cultured wheat or a cowpro, right? Yep. Whereas if it's a softening issue, then it's like, oh my gosh, you got to go back to the drawing board. You have to be like, well, is it the enzymes? Is it?
It may not even be ingredient related. It might be a proper thermal profile in terms of
that's true.
The baking or the processing. It can be as simple as giving the dough time for the protease enzymes to have enough activity to be able to soften those gluten strands and things. So, you know, it's a lot of different things that, you know, that you're right. The microbial one is usually the easiest one to solve, but everything else is much more of a challenge. Flavors are extremely challenging because quite often flavors get flashed off during heat processing or baking. And if flavors are not protected properly through packaging, then they can easily also drift and evaporate and things. So you can, that's mostly flavor loss, but there's also other interactions that can take place. So it's a super fun challenge too.
That's true. All right, Mark, with all the points that I highlighted, the 13 points, what was really important when you were formulating for a dry blend?
It's the emulsification systems. Those are the really key things in terms of eliminating things like PGME, PGMS, SSL, and replacing those with other functional ingredients to get the same functionality. Because PGME and PGMS especially are like wonder drugs together with the in a high ratio cake setting. Datums and SSL are not only functional in the oven, but they also help on the mixing end of things in that you shorten your mixing time and things like that as well. So it's finding the right combination relative to the product and the processing conditions that are typical or that can be expected. That is probably some of the biggest challenge in when doing a dry blend and making sure that that is covered, right? So that your ingredient statement, you know, is nice and short and doesn't have all those long things in there, right?
Yep. So a couple questions came in. What is the extraction method of natural colors from fruits? I don't know much about that.
They vary. A lot of times it's through there's a juicing process where the fruit is turned into a pulp, and then the juice is extracted through either a pressure system or just a straining type system. And then there are various concentration methods. A lot of fruits, the color is heat sensitive. So they like, you know, raspberries, for example, they're famous for turning purple if you get them a little bit too warm, right? So then it's sort of almost like a distillation process at low temperatures that takes place to be able to produce that extraction. So and that is why those types of natural colors tend to be a little more expensive, because the process is very time consuming and expensive to do. But you know, when it's done right, the colors are brilliant. They're just beautiful, right? It really, like things like annatto and turmeric and as you mentioned already, and of course things like beet juice, when you mix it with others, you get really nice shades that way. General Mills has, of course, eliminated all of the artificial colors in their cereals, and it has had it. They say it's not had a significant impact, but it has had an impact because like things like the Fruit Loops and things like that, they are now a little bit more muted in color, right? They're not ugly; they're just not as quite as vibrant. The colors they don't have as much of a punch, and I think that's probably more of a balance between cost and natural, right? Because if they used more to get the color more vibrant, it could work, but then the cost gets very high, and those cereals are very low margin products.
Why does CalPro not work for straight dough sometimes? Is there a solution for straight dough with a 2-hour process? Seen that too many times.
I'm thinking that might mean that either it's gassing out in the no, if it's only a 2-hour process, then
it's no, that's no effect on pH. Like pH is too high.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah,
likely.
so either you add like a fumaric acid or give it a longer ferment. I've been use a flour brew solution, right? And also, clean up really. And also if if everything you try doesn't work, then go into packaging, try MAP, try, the So Fresh product.
And to your point earlier when you were talking about sanitation, if you're going clean label and removing propionates and other acids or stuff that might be viewed as chemicals, then you need to be super clean, because even if you do everything right on the dough side and the kill step and everything else, if you have dirty belts, then you're going to pick it up there. It's always my famous story that I remember dealing with a customer overseas who was complaining that 30% of the cakes were going moldy. Well, if 30% of the cakes were going moldy, it wasn't the mix. It's your environment, right? Because if the mix was the problem, they'd all go moldy. So then there's, you have to look at your sanitation. So it's understanding what actually is happening. Where is this happening? And if the Calpro is not effective, is it really that the Calpro is not effective, or do you just have too much contamination?
That's true. All right, next question. Could you please advise a good starting point for home-based cookie manufacturer to increase the shelf life with clean label methods? I bake lactation cookies at home and would like to keep the product clean as I sell to breastfeeding mothers.
Humectants.
Yeah, the key point to me, correct me if I'm wrong, is really water activity.
Yep. Yeah. If your sugar is low, find other ways to get the sugar up, or get other humectants in there that to trap the water and give you the texture you want. Replacing some of the white sugar with brown sugar helps, because you get that brown sugar syrup. Corn syrups, of course, agave syrup, honey, maple syrups. The thing about honey and maple syrup is that they're fairly high in water themselves. So you need to adjust for that and bake that off. With the regulation changes that happened a little over a year ago, allulose is a rare sugar that does not get put on the label in the US as an added sugar any longer, and it's low in calories, and it can help as a humectant as well. So the last resort is if you're really struggling, and say like if it's a sugar-free cookie or something like that, is glycerin. Glycerin will help give you that softness and replace water, so that you keep your water activity down. The thing about glycerin is once you get over, I always kind of say stay below 10% of the formula. Once you get over 10%, it really starts to produce a burn on the palate, right? It's kind of like a reaction, almost like a flavor, right? And that's not desirable. But that would be the first thing I would look at with a cookie. And I think she mentioned it was an oatmeal cookie. And so oatmeal can trap moisture. Try to go to a larger flake oat. That will give you a nice nutty neck texture as well, but it also gives you less surface area. So you won't need as much water in getting the cookie dough to the right texture for depositing and things like that.
Yeah, one thing I would like to point out to people who are manufacturing at this scale, or baking at this scale, is this is still a really young startup, right? So you are going to scale up eventually if you are successful in your distribution, and distribution is dependent on shelf life. So my biggest experience in this was dark biscuits, dark cookies. And a huge issue was mold, right? Mainly because the water activity is so high, and the water activity is so high because they reconstitute with a lot of water. So try to think about this. Reduce the water first. Don't put in so much water. If there is any kind of water in your system, see if you can remove it, because the last water you put in, the last water you bake
Less
out.
to take out. Yeah.
Yeah. And it cuts less water you put in, the more you cut off your baking process.
Yep.
Okay.
And
So,
the baking time is energy, and that costs money.
correct. Yeah. So there are other options. Again, if you want to, get more personalized consultation, we have this available with Richard on our Baker Help page.
Mhm.
And also, when you scale up, you're going to have different problems. You're going to have to use cultured wheat or some form. And those are a whole set of other discussions altogether. So what Mark and I have discussed would be a really good starting point for you. I hope
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah, and keep in mind how is the cookie dough going to be processed when you scale up? I mean, you might be using a portion scoop right now, but is it going to be a wire cut system, which is one of the most common things out there, or is it going to be an extruded process or a sheet and cut process? What type of processing are you going to be doing? And that is going to affect your formula in the end then too. Is that, again, if it's something like a wire cut, you probably need a lot less water, because you don't need this sloppy texture, because it's going to be more like a plastic dough that has to go through a channel that is then cut by the wire as it drops onto the belt, right? So understanding what the process is when you scale up is going to be part of your formulating as well.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Mark. Lecithin in eggs are awesome for ensuring starch gel structures and holding off weeping and retrogradation. Are there natural base contenders to eggs? Seems soy lecithin is the main go-to in lieu of eggs. What do you think, Mark?
Yes. Soy lecithin has long been the most popular, and there is the most variety of options available with soy lecithin in terms of whether it's ethoxylated or how it's been treated in other ways in terms of heat resistance or things like that. The newcomers, so to speak, on the market these days that are very popular as well is sunflower lecithin, as you mentioned earlier. Sunflower is very clean tasting as well, and it's a fairly light in color, just like soy is also can be cleaned and like it's deodorized and bleached to give you a nice light golden color. The other one is canola, or also known as rapeseed lecithin. Although canola is genetically modified, it's being sold as canola lecithin in the US because of the objections to the term rape. But it is actually all the canola lecithin out there is most likely from rape and not GMO and GMO free. The only thing that I've seen when we've done work with that is that the canola lecithin is quite a bit darker in color, and it has a little bit stronger flavor. It's not objectionable, but it's there, right? And there's the one of the reasons that canola has come up and being started to produce more is that with the popularity of sunflower lecithin, it's hard to get sometimes. Soy is the most abundant. Although all of the proteins in the soy in lecithin are denatured and it is no longer considered an allergen, but just because it has to be declared in terms of the source, people who might be extremely soy sensitive are reluctant to then purchase that product if it's listed as an ingredient. But it is highly functional. It works great in terms of what the questioner has mentioned in combination with things like xanthan gum or guar gum as an emulsifying combination. It's used to almost completely replace datums. Could get really good results in combination of lecithin with xanthan and guar to replace datums. We have seen sometimes also differences in different products. Liquid lecithin seems to perform better in breads than the powdered lecithin does. We're not sure why, but powdered lecithin seems to perform better in things like cookies and cakes than the liquid lecithin does. And
Ooh,
that
okay.
has not been studied further in depth yet that I'm aware of, but it was an observation that we've made over the years when we've done
Nice to
comparisons.
know. Nice to know. Yes, and Cindy wanted to point it out that IFC solution does have organic liquid and powdered lecithins
Hmm.
and color soy and rapeseed for a variety of uses. Okay, last question. This is really difficult to answer. Thanks, Jan. What would be a good way to regulate water activity for gluten-free products?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Nice one to end the day.
Okay. Now we're all going to get rich.
Right.
Um,
Like I said, you know, the less water you put in, the less water you bake up, the
mhm.
lower the water activity. That's one thing to look at. Like Mark said again, you know, humectants in terms of honey, you know, any kind of syrups, you know, glycerin, that's going to help.
Yeah, on
You know,
cookies and sweet goods, it's a little bit easier in terms of, like you're saying, with using the humectants and things like that. When it comes to trying to emulate things like gluten-free breads or even flatbreads, like gluten-free tortillas and things like that, it gets extremely challenging because so much water is needed for the different types of protein replacements compared to gluten. And so because it's a completely different system, it is extremely challenging. IREX has done a great job of this with some of their gluten-free offerings. I believe most of that is all quite proprietary as well. But it is, they've done a fantastic job of it. And that's something worth, looking at, something from that company as a solution if you need that maybe in combination, or get them to help you with your formulas.
yeah, unfortunately with gluten-free, you know, it's so much starches, pre-gel starches that absorb that much water, which is hard to bake out in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. You just have to use preservatives, you know, things
Yep.
like sourmate or breadmate, breadmate. There's also breadmate GF, which is a cultured dextrose.
Mm-hmm.
Or I believe it is. I'm not sure. I'm not so sure what it is. J&K should be able to tell you that. So if you're baking fresh, that's great. But if you need a weak shelf life, then you really need mole
Yep.
inhibitors. Yeah. All right. I promise one more question. I missed this one. What do you know about cultured dextrose, and which do you think is better for bakery products? Cultured dextrose or cultured wheat? It
Well,
depends.
very different application
Yeah.
type. One of the things, of course, right off the bat is that if you're using it in a gluten-free type application, then cultured wheat is not even an option. Uh, Cultured dextrose is probably more for the type of fiber contribution that you get. You're getting soluble fiber out of that, and it's emulsification properties and things. So I think that's kind of the main thing that you're going to get there. Um, I don't know that otherwise they would, I'm not sure. I've never compared them myself. I'll be honest. But just sort of extrapolating, thinking about how they're processed and things, I think they're both different types of applications. Whereas with the cultured wheat is more for dough applications, and it's going to help with fermentation and things like that. Whereas the cultured dextrose will actually tend to inhibit fermentation somewhat.
If you're interested in hearing more from Mark, join his podcast. It's Baked in Science. His first episode is on. You can also interact with Mark on the forums because
Yep.
he manages the forums. And I will be around as usual, and I can be reached at Baker Help if you need any help. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate you spending this time with us, but it is time to go. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
It's been great, very interesting. Bye-bye.